Dan Orlosky studies it, and he's kind enough to take a few minutes and join us right now. Dan, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys?
You ever want to be an OC?
If I got into coaching, absolutely. I mean, if I got into coaching, I would want to be a head coach. I think calling plays and in those moments and figuring out what defenses is doing and how to handle it and attack it and have the answers to all the questions that they present to you, it certainly seems like a ton of fun and like a super appealing challenge.
Best you ever played for?
Playcaller, I would tell you, is Klint Kubiak. And that's just when he was a head coach in many ways too, but he had this unbelievable ability to figure out what a defense was doing, and two things: to just help the quarterback get into rhythm in the game, just had a great understanding about just a feel. And the second thing was, I don't think I've ever been around somebody better that knew how to hurt defenses. And they just knew how to hurt what the defense was doing. And then the third thing I'll tell you is he was great with having quarterbacks prepared for worst case scenario. What do we do? Like, always to know, okay, if we get what we don't want, what do we do? And he was the best at that.
What about his kid? Because that seems to be an option here in Seattle. Can Klint do some of those same things?
Yeah, I can't sit here and tell you I know Klint. I knew Klint 15 years ago when I was in Houston with Coobs, but having the opportunity, obviously, to grow up and watch his father and be around some of the people that were under that tree and learn that offense and, then his time in Minnesota. And so, I actually really enjoyed some of the stuff that they did down in New Orleans this year. And I would tell you, I thought some of the injuries to their offensive line derailed some of the stuff they were doing. Obviously, the injuries to both some of the receivers and the quarterback impacted that as well. But I candidly, I like anybody that is from this tree that has called plays that has shown they're good at it, because I think the scheme is a big-time star.
How would you compare and contrast that scheme to what you watched to the Seattle Seahawks in 2024?
Oh, very different light years. I thought Grubb did a pretty cool job with some of the new age stuff. I thought some of the 4x1 stuff that they got into is really intriguing at times, specifically with DK on the backside. I think the biggest issue is, the biggest disparity is this. In that tree that Klint comes from, that scheme, the most fundamental part of it is everything looks the same. Okay, so there is always a butterfly effect to a play call. Things are always constantly attached. There's a consistent sequencing of events. Okay, so you're painting a picture so often in that scheme rather than writing a letter. You're writing a poem in many ways. In Grubb's stuff this year, I do think that there was, we're going to call this play, and then we're going to call this play, and 2 quarters later, we're going to call this play. There wasn't a lot of attachment to all right, we called this, and we have these 3 things off of it that are going to look the same, or they were set up because of. I think that's the fundamental difference.
And that, puts the hardest strain on a defense because they have to use their brain to figure out which of the many options it is?
Of course, yes. So I always say that one of the cool parts of me trying to analogize these schemes and these systems that, again, Klint would come from is they're great illusionists. They're constantly forcing you to look over here, and they're doing something else. And so your attention is elsewhere to what is actually happening. And, one of those things that as an offense you constantly want to force defenses to do is play with doubt, play with a question mark, play with on your heels. Great defenses play downhill, they play aggressive, and they play convicted. That's in many ways all athletes. And so when you can constantly get defenses to play with doubt, with hesitation, with a lack of clarity, you advantage as an offense because, in the simplest terms, I know where I'm going. And if you have a question mark of where I'm going, then I get to get there faster than you.
So I don't have your credentials, certainly. I don't watch film the way you do or anything like that. But I am a little curious about one of the potential pitfalls with this system. And we had Matt Hasselbeck on a couple weeks ago, and he mentioned something about how the zone scheme, zone blocking can be viewed as a little bit more weak, a little bit more finesse rather than tough with a gap scheme and running the ball.
Yep.
We know that, especially in the post-cut block world, that what Mike Shanahan used to run in Denver is not quite as easy as it used to be, where you just cut everybody on the backside. And I think it's safe to say that Mike McDonald really seemed enamored with what they did both in Detroit and, of course, in Baltimore this year, where they were just running people over with just phenomenal offensive lines and running games.
Yep.
Why go towards a Kubiak style system as opposed to what they're doing in Detroit, and where Hank Fraley is one of the other candidates here for this job?
Well, I would tell you that Detroit does have some elements of it. So I think the thing that is probably the biggest difference in a lot of the Kubiak system growth is, and one of the things that's overwhelmingly the conversation in the NFL is, there's nobody that majors in like really one run anymore. The only team that comes to mind is Atlanta, and Atlanta, Zach Robinson comes from that same tree. They were heavy outside zone, the heavy zone scheme. Everybody else that's good at running the football really has diversity in their run game. And so like Liam Cohen, he comes from a Shanahan tree, but they were awesome in their gap scheme stuff this year. I would tell you, Joe Brady, who comes from a little bit of this in Buffalo, they're awesome in their run game diversity. Detroit's the leader of the run game diversity. Matt LaFleur, who comes from this tree, is a run game diverse guy. So that's one of the growths and developments of that scheme or that tree is the diversity and how many different runs you can deploy in it. So, 15, 20 years ago, and Brock knows this, it was really the outside zone. Mm-hmm. Now those people are really running multiple versions of zones. They're getting to it in multiple ways, in and out, but also there's a lot of the counter stuff that's being run in the NFL nowadays and the wham stuff. So I don't think it's the one-trick run game that it was years ago.
So this is first priority for the Seahawks, figure out kind of the coordinator and put together that offense. Then the second largest priority, Dan, is you have got Geno and DK both going into the final year of their contracts with big cap numbers and trying to figure it out. And as you can imagine, if you were doing morning talk radio in Seattle every day, as Salky and I do, this is a right at the top of the list conversation. And I think Geno will be first because they've got to make a decision around the new league year with most of his guaranteed money. Just kind of big picture before we dial in Salk's epic poll. What did you think how would you characterize Geno and DK's 2024 season?
There's some highs, more lows than they had in the past. I thought there was more a disconnection that they had in the past, more of them not being on the same page than they had in the past. Now, is that attached to a little bit of the growth of JSN? You saw Jackson Smith and Jigba really start to develop. And so not in a purposeful way, but just sometimes when that second receiver starts to go and they emerge, it does maybe have a little bit of a residual of that other quarterback and wide receiver connection. And so I think that there was still some moments when that connection was, one of the two best at doing it and one of the top 10 duos in the league. But I also think that, maybe the scheme wasn't the ideal fit for them because I do think that it moved or it put DK in a little bit of a silo. I like when guys get to move around a little bit, even though they're capable of being by themselves. I don't necessarily think you have to rely on that. So I still think that both those guys are pretty darn good players, specifically when they're with each other.
Well, so that may help influence how you answer the question that we've been talking about throughout the day, and that is if you are the Seahawks, you're about $27 million over the cap right now. They do have a bunch of guys that they can probably move on from that will help them get back under that. Tyler Lockett and Chenna Nwosu and Dre Jones, and kind of go down that list. But if Geno wants a raise and DK wants a raise, can you bring them both back? Do you bring both back? Do you bring neither back? Do you bring one back, the other back? What would you do if you were John Schneider?
Yeah, I still believe that you're trying to have both of those guys be on your football team. This is not a team that was, 3-14 in rebuild mode. They weren't far off from obviously getting into the playoffs, and those two guys are going to be integral parts of that moving forward for the next year or two or 3 years, if that's going to be the case. Obviously, those numbers are for people that are significantly smarter than I to figure out. But I do believe if you have one or the other, it's obviously you're choosing the quarterback. It's much harder to find a quarterback that is as consistent and as good as Geno Smith than it is to find a good receiver. And in many ways, DK's had moments of being a dominant receiver. So I think you want both back, but I also probably sit here and tell you it's probably fair to start to, whether people like it or not, you are starting to figure out and have the conversation of what is life after Geno Smith, whether that's in a year or 2 or 3 years. Because the last thing, and I remind people every year, teams, you don't want to be the Steelers, where you're sitting there going, oh my gosh, what do we do?
Well, and winning 9-10 games, it feels like every year, and that's kind of where the Seahawks have been.
Bingo.
So the question I would ask back, and maybe I'm giving away what I feel here, is are there any non-starting quarterbacks in the league right now that you would want to give a legit chance to? I'm guessing the answer is no, but is there anyone in the league that's not starting that you would say, I got to go out and get that guy and make him a starting quarterback for my team?
No, I don't feel that way.
Okay, so if that's the case, and I assume that would be the case, how do you set yourself up for that next world beyond Geno if he's probably going to win you 9 or 10 games again next year and the year potentially after that? Where are you going to get out of this second-tier class in the NFL and either get to the Detroits, Baltimores, Buffaloes, Phillies, or get away from them so that you can find a quarterback to get back to that tier?
You have to draft early. And what I mean early is by the timing of it rather than the slotting of it. Yeah, you're gonna have to have that moment that the Green Bay Packers had a couple years ago, or the Buffalo Bills had years ago, or the Kansas City Chiefs had years ago, where you sit there and go, no, we got a good football team. Our quarterback's a good player. We don't need to draft a quarterback. And you go, no, we do. We're going to draft a quarterback now because we have evaluated them and we really like this guy. And so we're going to go up and get him. And maybe he doesn't play for us for a year or two, but we think that he's the next 10 years. And, those are uncomfortable moments and they're difficult conversations and you rub people the wrong way, especially alpha personalities. But that's what's best for the future of the organization. And so, yeah, they are one of those teams that is probably going to start that timeline of, hey, we really like this player. We're picking at 22. We probably have to go up to 12 to get him type of thing. That's going to be part of their conversations probably over the next 24 months.
Anybody in this class you like, Dan? Last thought for me or question for me. Anybody in this class? Does Jackson Dart move your needle in that way? Any of these guys at the Senior Bowl, I think 5 or 6 of them are going to be kind of mid to late round guys that could accelerate. Anybody you're intrigued with in that kind of scenario?
Yeah, I think there's 3, Brock. I'm not going to say Shador and Cam Ward because we know that they're going to be in those conversations for top 10s, and I got to dive into these guys, but I am intrigued by Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers is a very talented thrower of the football, and I think proved to be very clutch this year for Texas. So you're intrigued by him. Why doesn't the production match the talent all the time is a question I have. I'm a little bit bummed about Dylan Gabriel, if I'm being candid. I thought he was a guy that, could you go on a run in the college football playoff and kind of vault yourself in? Because I think he's such a talented thrower and he plays really fast. But, the disappointing game soured me maybe just a little bit. Milroe in Alabama, I'm not telling anybody he's a finished product, but, the physical talent, the character and work ethic, the improvement we have seen as a passer, I'm very intrigued by it. Yeah, there's 4. Jackson Dart is another guy that, played a ton of college football, very physically talented, throws the ball downfield. So those are 3 or 4 guys that I at least, stay round 2, or maybe you can say, this guy's a top 20 player that maybe we get at the 35th pick.
Brock played me some sound of you with Stephen A. the other day talking about the Vikings loss. You watched that game and didn't think that Sam Darnold was terrible? Really?
I did not know. So,
come on.
Okay, so.
Come on.
Okay, I'll present this question back to you. what quarterback in this situation do we think plays well in that game?
I don't know that I have an answer to your question, and it's a good one, and that's a good arguing technique. But, I mean, he got sacked 9 times. A lot of them looked to me like it was his fault. He looked like he was just not seeing anything. He was late on every throw. And a lot of that mimicked the Sam Darnold that I'd watched every year of his college and pro career until this year.
See, my pushback again to that would be like, well, what does it look like his fault? Like, tell me as – how does a quarterback have a sack that's his fault? Because I do think sacks are more often a quarterback problem. But one, was people open on them, like in a reality of like, hey, you should have cut that one loose? I think 1 or 2. Did you have a blitz off the second or third level that you should have redirected or you should have thrown hot to? No, even though 3 sacks came unblocked. When we sit there and go, well, it's the quarterback's fault, I sit there and go, what is it? Tell me what is the benchmarks for a sack being a quarterback's fault? Because more often than not, those weren't them.
Brock? Brock, step in and answer this question for me.
I obviously don't know the answers to that. You're the trash master. This is your fight, and you decided to pick it.
I can't argue with that. I mean, look, I don't watch the film. I didn't play the game at any sort of a high level. I mean, even high school, really. I think
the pushback would be there are times to get the ball out. B, you can't fumble. Like that was such a killer.
Totally.
You get hit. I know it sucks, and it's not always your fault. But
maybe I am biased in some ways watching the game on television, and Troy Aikman was very critical himself, which is not the norm for Troy. I mean, he's generally a pretty positive color commentator, and he's continually pointing out, see, you got to slide here, you got to move there, you got to be patient here. And maybe that affected the way I watched the game. To me, it's just fan eyes that said, yeah, that's not going to cut it playing quarterback that way in a big game.
Yeah, I understand that point, and Troy's obviously commentary of it, which I have endless amounts of respect for. I always look at it like this. When the quarterback doesn't play well, did I think, one, that the offensive line gave him the opportunity to play well more often than not? I would answer that no in that game. Second, were there people open more often than not? I would answer no in that game. And then the third thing would be, do I believe that they schematically made some type of adjustment to make things easier on the quarterback? And I would say no in that game. So I'm not absolving Sam. I agree with Brock. He can't fumble. The one thing that I had overall walking away from it was, I wish Sam took off and ran at a moment or two in that game. And that didn't happen. That's the one thing I would hang on him is saying, hey, dude, at some point we got to go be an athlete and threaten them.
Yeah.
The best are. I mean, that's for sure. We're going to get to see it this weekend, obviously, in Buffalo with that game. And watching Jaden Daniels last week was just, oh, my gosh, it was so much fun. So, hey, Dan, we appreciate it. Thank you. That was fun. You were fun to argue with. And hopefully you'll come back. Hopefully that wasn't too much, and we can do it again. Thanks, man. We appreciate it.
I'm counting on it, guys. Thanks.